They say ignorance is bliss, and for the longest time, I believed it. My name is Jake, and I thought I had the perfect life. Great job, beautiful wife, and a best friend I could trust with my life. That illusion shattered in the cruelest way possible. My wife, Emily, was cheating on me. But it wasn't just the act of betrayal that crushed me. It was the conspiracy of silence that surrounded it. Everyone knew. My best friend, my relatives, even his son, they all knew and kept it from me. It started on a regular Tuesday evening. I came home from work, tired but looking forward to dinner with Emily. She was in the kitchen, humming softly, completely at ease. As she served my favorite dish, lasagna, I felt a pang of love and gratitude. Little did I know, I was dining with a stranger. A week later, I noticed Emily's behavior was changing. She was distant, distracted, and her phone was suddenly always within her reach. My gut told me something was wrong, but I brushed it aside. Trust was the foundation of our marriage, or so I thought. The bombshell dropped during a family gathering at my best friend Tom's house. Tom and I had been inseparable since high school. He was the brother I never had. That evening, while everyone was enjoying the barbecue, I went inside to grab some more drinks. As I walked past the study, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "Emily's getting reckless," a voice said. I peeked through the door crack and saw Tom's son, Brian, speaking to his father. "If Jake finds out, it's going to destroy him." Tom sighed heavily. "We can't let that happen. Jake's been through enough already." My heart pounded in my chest as I processed their words. My wife was involved with someone, and my best friend and his son knew. I felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and confusion. Why didn't they tell me? The next day, I confronted Emily. I didn't mention what I'd overheard. Instead, I asked her directly if there was something she needed to tell me. She denied everything, her eyes wide with feigned innocence, but I could see the cracks in her facade. Determined to find the truth, I did something I'd never done before. I checked her phone while she was in the shower. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There were explicit messages and photos exchanged with Brian. My wife was cheating on me with my best friend's son. Feeling like the ground had been ripped from beneath me, I called Tom. He came over, oblivious to what I knew. I confronted him, expecting anger, shame, anything to explain why he kept this from me. Instead, he looked defeated. "Jake, you don't understand," Tom began, his voice shaky. "Brian got involved with some dangerous people. Emily found out and blackmailed him to keep quiet. She threatened to expose his past if he didn't do what she wanted. We were all trying to protect Brian." I was speechless. Blackmail. My wife was blackmailing my best friend's son to keep their affair secret. The twisted irony was almost too much to bear. As the days passed, I decided I couldn't just let this go. They had all betrayed me. And for what? To protect Brian from facing the consequences of his own actions? I needed a plan. Revenge wasn't just a desire, it was a necessity. They had to pay for what they did, and I would make sure they did. That night, as Emily slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, plotting my next move. I was going to expose them all, one by one, and watch as their lives crumbled. This was just the beginning. The morning after discovering the truth, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Emily acted as if nothing had changed, but every smile, every touch, felt like a dagger. I couldn't stand the sight of her, but I had to play my part, for now. My plan for revenge was starting to take shape, and I needed to be patient. First, I needed more information. I had to understand the full extent of Emily's betrayal and the lengths to which Tom and Brian had gone to protect their secret. It was time to dig deeper. While Emily was out running errands, I scoured her phone for more evidence. Every message, every photo, was a piece of the puzzle. My suspicions were confirmed. Brian wasn't Emily's only affair. There were other names, other men she had manipulated and blackmailed. She was using their secrets to keep them silent, all while presenting herself as the perfect wife. The more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became, but I had to keep my emotions in check. I needed to stay focused. Next, I turned my attention to Tom. We were scheduled to meet up for our regular Friday night drink at the local bar. It was the perfect opportunity to gather more intel. I arrived early, sitting at our usual table, nursing a beer as I waited for him. When Tom walked in, he seemed relieved to see me, as if my presence confirmed that everything was still normal. "Hey," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "How's it going?" Same old, I replied, forcing a smile. "How's Brian?" Tom's expression darkened for a moment before he quickly masked it with a smile. "He's fine, just going through a rough patch, you know?" We made small talk, but my mind was racing. I needed to find a way to get Tom to open up. The opportunity came when he mentioned a recent argument with Brian. "What's going on between you two?" I asked, feigning concern. "You've been looking stressed lately." Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated, Jake. Brian's made some bad choices, and it's catching up to him. I'm just trying to keep him out of trouble." I nodded sympathetically, hiding my disgust. "I get it. Family can be tough. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." Tom looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and guilt. "Thanks, Jake. I appreciate it. You've always been like a brother to me." His words stung, but I kept my composure. "Same here." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was buzzing with everything I'd learned. Emily, Tom, Brian, they were all tangled in this web of lies and deceit. I needed to find a way to expose them all, but I had to be smart about it. If I rushed, they'd just close ranks and shut me out. Over the next few days, I started collecting evidence. I recorded conversations, took screenshots of messages, and even installed a hidden camera in our bedroom. Emily's brazenness knew no bounds, and I needed every bit of proof I could get. One evening, I caught a break. Emily had gone out, leaving her laptop unattended. I quickly accessed her email and found a trove of incriminating messages. There were exchanges with several men, detailing their affairs and her threats to keep them silent. But one email stood out. It was from Brian, begging her to stop. "Emily, please," the email read. "I can't keep doing this. My dad is suspicious, and I can't handle the guilt anymore. Just let me go." I forwarded the email to myself and quickly deleted any trace of my activity. The pieces were falling into place. I had enough evidence to expose Emily and her web of deceit, but I couldn't stop there. Tom and Brian had to face the consequences too. That night, I sat down and wrote an anonymous letter. I included copies of the emails, photos, and messages I had gathered. I addressed it to my entire family and Tom's as well. They all needed to know the truth. I also created a separate package for Tom's wife, Susan. She deserved to know what her son and husband had been hiding from her. The next morning, I mailed the letters and returned home, feeling a strange sense of calm. The truth was out there now, and there was no turning back. I didn't know how everyone would react, but it didn't matter. They all played a part in this betrayal, and they needed to face the consequences. As I waited for the fallout, I prepared for the next phase of my plan. Emily, Tom, Brian, they weren't going to get away with this. Not by a long shot. The storm was coming, and I was ready to watch it all unfold. The letters were sent, and all I could do was wait. The days dragged by, each one heavier than the last. Emily carried on as if nothing was wrong, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I watched her, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. How could she betray me so thoroughly? How could everyone I trusted conspire against me? It started with a phone call. I was at work when my phone buzzed, and I saw it was from my Aunt Linda. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jake, what the hell is going on?" Her voice was a mix of anger and confusion. "I don't know what you mean," I replied, playing dumb. "Don't give me that. We all got these letters with some disturbing information about Emily and Brian. Is it true?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on me. "Yes, Aunt Linda, it's all true." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I can't believe this. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't know until recently," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "And when I found out, I had to make sure everyone knew the truth." Linda was silent for a moment before speaking again. "I'm so sorry, Jake. This must be tearing you apart." "It is," I admitted, "but I had to do it. They needed to be exposed." As the days went by, the fallout from the letters spread like wildfire. My family was in chaos, with everyone calling and texting me, demanding answers. Emily, oblivious to the storm brewing around her, continued her charade. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth reached her. The confrontation happened on a Friday evening. I was in the living room, pretending to read a book, when Emily burst through the door, her face flushed with anger. "Jake, what the hell is this?" She threw a stack of papers at me. It was the letter I had sent to her family. I calmly set the book down and looked at her. "It's the truth." Her eyes blazed with fury. "You had no right to do this. You've ruined everything." "No, Emily," I said. "You ruined everything when you decided to cheat on me with Brian, and don't think I don't know about the others." She stared at me, her face a mask of shock and anger. "How dare you?" "How dare I interrupted, my voice rising. "How dare you betray me? You played everyone for a fool, but the game's over now." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. "Jake, please, I can explain." "Save it," I said, cutting her off. "I'm done listening to your lies. You need to leave." For a moment, I thought she might argue, but then she just turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I sat back down, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. This was just the beginning of the fallout. The next day, I received a call from Susan, Tom's wife. Her voice was shaky, and I could hear the strain of tears. "Jake, I don't know what to say. Tom and Brian, I can't believe this." "I'm sorry," I said, genuinely feeling for her. I didn't know how else to expose the truth. She sniffled. "I understand. Thank you for telling me. I need to process this." After we hung up, I received a text from Tom. It was short and filled with anger. "We need to talk, now." I agreed to meet him at the park where we used to play basketball as kids. When I arrived, Tom was already there, pacing angrily. As soon as he saw me, he stormed over, his face red with fury. "How could you do this?" he shouted. "You've destroyed my family." "I destroyed your family?" I retorted. "You and Brian destroyed mine first. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." Tom looked like he wanted to hit me, but he held back. Brian was in trouble. We were trying to protect him. By keeping me in the dark? By allowing Emily to blackmail him? "You betrayed me, Tom. You, of all people." He deflated, the anger draining out of him. "I know. I'm sorry. Jake, I thought I was doing the right thing." "It's too late for apologies," I said, my voice cold. "Now, you have to deal with the consequences." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The truth was out, and the people who had betrayed me were facing their reckoning. But this was far from over. Emily, Tom, Brian, they all had more to answer for, and I wasn't done with them yet. I spent the next few days laying low, letting the dust settle. Emily moved in with a friend, and I had the house to myself. It gave me time to think, to plan my next move. I knew that simply exposing the truth wasn't enough. They needed to feel the pain they had caused me. One evening, as I was going through Emily's emails again, I found something interesting. An exchange between her and one of her lovers, a wealthy businessman named Richard. He was married, and from the tone of the emails, desperate to keep their affair a secret. I saw an opportunity. I crafted an anonymous email to Richard, attaching the incriminating messages and photos. I hinted that his secret was safe, for a price. I didn't want his money. I wanted information, specifically dirt on Tom's business dealings. Richard, desperate to protect his reputation, agreed to my terms. The information he provided was more than I could have hoped for. Tom had been involved in some shady dealings, skirting the edges of legality. Armed with this new ammunition, I knew exactly how to bring him down. As I prepared to set my plan into motion, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. They had all betrayed me, but now the tables were turning. I was done being the victim. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. With the information I had gathered from Richard, I felt a surge of power and control I hadn't experienced in a long time. The pieces of my revenge plan were falling into place, and it was time to strike back. My first target was Tom. He needed to feel the weight of his betrayal, and I knew exactly how to make that happen. Tom was a respected businessman in our community, but his reputation was built on a house of cards. The dirt Richard provided me revealed that Tom had been involved in tax evasion and under-the-table deals that could ruin him if they came to light. Armed with this knowledge, I crafted an anonymous dossier, detailing all his illicit activities, and sent it to the IRS and the local news outlets. Within a week, the news broke. Tom's face was plastered across every screen and newspaper in town. The authorities launched an investigation, and Tom's business partners started to distance themselves. I watched with grim satisfaction as Tom's empire began to crumble. I received a desperate call from him, but I ignored it. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. Next, I turned my attention to Brian. He was the more fragile link in the chain, and I knew he wouldn't hold up under pressure. I decided to play a psychological game with him. I started sending him anonymous messages, hinting that I knew everything and that his world was about to fall apart. Each message was carefully crafted to escalate his paranoia and fear. Brian started to unravel quickly. He stopped showing up for work, and his friends noticed a drastic change in his behavior. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, jumpy and paranoid. One night, I followed him to a bar and watched as he drank himself into oblivion. It was almost too easy. I approached him, pretending to be a concerned friend, and steered the conversation towards his guilt. "You know," I said, leaning in close, "secrets have a way of coming out. You can't hide forever." He looked at me, eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean?" I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Just that people talk, and when they do, lives get ruined." Brian paled, and I knew I had him on the ropes. I left him there, stewing in his fear, knowing it was only a matter of time before he cracked. Emily was next. Her betrayal was the deepest cut, and she deserved to feel the full brunt of my wrath. I knew her weaknesses, her vanity and her fear of losing her social standing. I decided to hit her where it hurt the most. I created a fake social media account and started spreading rumors about her infidelity and manipulation. I leaked the incriminating photos and messages, ensuring they reached our friends and her colleagues. The backlash was swift and brutal. Emily's social circle turned against her, and she became a pariah. Her job was in jeopardy, and she received threatening messages from the other men she had blackmailed. She called me, sobbing and begging for help, but I remained cold and distant. "Emily, you brought this on yourself," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "You destroyed our marriage, and now you're facing the consequences." She continued to cry, but I hung up, feeling a sense of closure. My plan was working, but there was still more to be done. I needed to ensure that everyone who had betrayed me felt the full weight of their actions. I decided to confront Tom in person. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized that I was behind his downfall. I arranged to meet him at our old basketball court, the place where our friendship had started. When I arrived, Tom was already there, looking haggard and defeated. "Jake," he said, his voice weak, "why are you doing this?" I looked at him, my expression hard. "Because you betrayed me, Tom. You chose to protect Brian instead of being honest with me. You let Emily manipulate and blackmail him, and you all conspired to keep me in the dark." Tom looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I thought I was protecting him. I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, you did," I said, my voice cold, "and now you're paying the price." Tom fell silent, and I turned to leave. There was nothing more to say. As I walked away, I felt a sense of finality. The revenge I had sought was almost complete, but there was one more piece of the puzzle left. I returned home and reviewed the remaining evidence I had collected. There was still the matter of the other men Emily had blackmailed. They needed to be exposed as well. I prepared another batch of anonymous letters, this time addressed to their families and employers. I included all the incriminating details, ensuring that their lives would be as disrupted as mine had been. The next morning, I mailed the letters and sat back, waiting for the final act of my revenge to unfold. I had set the wheels in motion, and there was no stopping it now. The people who had betrayed me would face their reckoning, and I would finally have my justice. As I watched the chaos I had unleashed, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I had been wronged, but I had taken control and fought back. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was tempered by the knowledge that I had not allowed them to get away with it. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of their downfall, and it felt damn good. The fallout from the letters spread quickly. By the end of the week, my phone was buzzing nonstop with messages and calls. I ignored most of them, focusing instead on the final stages of my plan. Each day brought new developments, each more satisfying than the last. One morning, I received a call from Richard, the wealthy businessman who had been one of Emily's many lovers. His voice was frantic. "Jake, it's Richard. We need to talk. Now." I agreed to meet him at a cafe downtown. When I arrived, Richard looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was disheveled, his eyes darting nervously around the room. As soon as I sat down, he leaned in, lowering his voice. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he hissed. "I know exactly what I've done," I replied calmly, "and I have no regrets." Richard's face contorted with anger. "You've ruined my life. My wife is leaving me. My business is under scrutiny, and I'm being blackmailed." I couldn't help but smile. I'm aware, but that's what happens when you get involved with someone like Emily. Actions have consequences. He stared at me, his expression a mix of rage and desperation. What do you want from me? Money? I'll pay you whatever you want. Just make this go away. I shook my head. I don't want your money, Richard. I just wanted the truth to come out. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. I stood up and left him there, feeling a sense of vindication. Richard was just one of many who had to face the consequences of their actions. As the weeks went by, the chaos continued to spread. Tom's business was crumbling, Brian was spiraling into depression, and Emily was ostracized by her social circle. But there was still more to be done. One evening, as I was going through my emails, I received an unexpected message from Susan, Tom's wife. She wanted to meet and talk. I agreed, curious about what she had to say. We met at a quiet park, away from prying eyes. Susan looked tired, but determined. As soon as we sat down, she got straight to the point. Jake, I know you're behind all of this, she said. And while I understand why you did it, I need your help. I raised an eyebrow. Help with what? Tom is falling apart. He's not the man I married anymore. And Brian, he's talking about doing something drastic. I'm scared for him. I sighed, feeling a twinge of guilt. Susan, I'm sorry for what you're going through, but they brought this on themselves. I know, she said, tears welling up in her eyes, but they're still my family. Please, Jake, help me save them. Her plea touched a nerve. Despite everything, I didn't want blood on my hands. What do you want me to do? Talk to them. Help them see the error of their ways. Maybe if it comes from you, they'll listen. I agreed, reluctantly. I wasn't sure what good it would do, but I owed it to Susan to try. The next day, I arranged to meet Tom and Brian at a neutral location. They arrived together, both looking worse for wear. Jake, what do you want? Tom asked, his voice weary. I want to talk, I said. Susan is worried about you both. She asked me to help. Brian looked at me, his eyes filled with anger and fear. Help? You've destroyed us! No, you destroyed yourselves, I replied. I just made sure the truth came out. Tom slumped in his chair, looking defeated. Jake, I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting my son. And look where that got you, I said. Your business is falling apart. Your family is in shambles. And Brian is on the edge. Was it worth it? He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. No, it wasn't. I see that now. Brian, however, wasn't as repentant. You think you're so righteous? Jake, you're just as bad as the rest of us. You've ruined lives. I did what I had to do, I said, my voice firm. You all betrayed me, and I needed to make sure you faced the consequences. Brian stood up, shaking with rage. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded. Are you happy now? No, Brian, I said quietly. I'm not happy, but at least I can look at myself in the mirror and know I did the right thing. He stormed off, leaving Tom and me alone. Tom looked at me, his expression one of regret and sorrow. Can you ever forgive me, Jake? I sighed, feeling the weight of his question. I don't know, Tom, but for Susan's sake, I'll try. You need to make things right with her and Brian. It's not too late. As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Revenge had been satisfying, but it hadn't brought me peace. There was still a void inside me, one that I wasn't sure would ever be filled. But I had done what I set out to do. I had exposed the truth and made them face their actions. Now, it was up to them to rebuild their lives. That night, as I sat alone in my house, I realized that my journey wasn't over. There were still scars to heal, both for me and for those who had betrayed me. But I had taken the first step towards reclaiming my life, and that was a victory in itself. The days after my conversation with Tom and Brian were filled with a sense of uneasy calm. I had taken my revenge, and now the dust was starting to settle. But instead of feeling triumphant, I was left with a deep sense of emptiness. I had exposed the truth, but at what cost? I decided to focus on myself for a while. I took time off work, signed up for a gym membership, and started seeing a therapist. It was time to rebuild, not just my life, but also myself. I couldn't let the betrayal define who I was. I needed to find a way to move forward. One evening, as I was leaving the gym, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Jake, it's Susan. Her voice was strained, and I could hear the urgency. Susan? What's wrong? It's Brian. He tried to take his own life. He's in the hospital. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. Despite everything, I never wanted it to come to this. Is he going to be okay? They think so, but he's not out of the woods yet. I'm on my way, I said, already heading to my car. When I arrived at the hospital, I found Susan sitting in the waiting room, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as I approached, and I could see the toll this was taking on her. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How is he?" I asked, sitting down beside her. "They've stabilized him, but he's going to need a lot of help," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know how we got here. Jake, everything is falling apart." I took her hand, offering what little comfort I could. "We'll get through this, Susan. Brian is strong. He'll pull through." We sat in silence for a while, both lost in our thoughts. The weight of what had happened hung heavily between us. I couldn't help but feel partially responsible for Brian's state. My actions had set off a chain reaction, and now we were dealing with the consequences. A few hours later, a doctor approached us, looking tired but hopeful. "Brian is stable and resting. He's going to need psychiatric help, but with time and support, he should recover." Susan let out a sigh of relief, her shoulders sagging. "Doctor, thank you." As we left the hospital, Susan turned to me. "Jake, I know this might sound strange, but I need your help. Brian needs all the support he can get, and he trusts you. Will you talk to him?" I hesitated, unsure if I was the right person to help. But then I saw the desperation in Susan's eyes and knew I couldn't say no. "Of course, Susan. I'll do whatever I can." The next day, I visited Brian in the hospital. He looked fragile, a shadow of the confident young man he once was. He barely glanced at me as I entered the room. "Hey, Brian," I said softly, pulling up a chair beside his bed. He didn't respond, staring at the ceiling with vacant eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I'm sorry, Brian. I never wanted it to come to this." For a long moment, there was silence. Then, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why, Jake? Why did you do it?" "I was angry," I admitted. "I felt betrayed by everyone I trusted. I wanted you all to feel the pain I was feeling." Brian closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Well, you succeeded. We're all broken now." "I know," I said, my voice filled with regret. "And I'm sorry. But it's not too late to fix things. You can get better. Brian, you have people who care about you." He turned his head to look at me, his eyes filled with pain. "Do you still care about me, Jake, after everything?" I nodded, feeling tears prick at my own eyes. "Yes, Brian, I do. We've all made mistakes, but we can still make things right." He didn't say anything, but I could see a flicker of hope in his eyes. It was a small step, but it was something. As I left the hospital, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't enough to expose the truth. I needed to help rebuild what had been broken. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, therapy sessions, and difficult conversations. I spent time with Tom, trying to mend our friendship. He was a broken man, but he was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. One afternoon, as we sat in his backyard, Tom turned to me. "Jake, I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did, but I want to try. I want to be the friend you deserve." I looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "We can't change the past, Tom, but we can work towards a better future. For both of us." Tom nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "Thank you, Jake, for giving me a second chance." Slowly, things started to improve. Brian was released from the hospital and began his journey to recovery. Emily, facing the consequences of her actions, reached out to me. She wanted to talk, to explain herself. Reluctantly, I agreed. We met at a cafe, the tension palpable between us. Emily looked tired, her once perfect facade shattered. She fidgeted with her cup, avoiding my gaze. "Jake, I don't expect you to forgive me," she began, her voice trembling, "but I need you to know that I'm sorry for everything." I listened, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. "Why, Emily, why did you do it?" She sighed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was unhappy, Jake. I felt trapped, and I made terrible choices. I know I hurt you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." I didn't know what to say. The wounds were still fresh, but I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Emily, but I hope you find a way to make things right." She nodded, wiping her tears. I'm trying, Jake. I really am. As we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of closure. The road to redemption was long, but at least we were taking the first steps. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to rebuild my life from the ashes of betrayal. In the months that followed, I focused on healing. I mended my relationships with my family, supported Brian in his recovery, and worked on my own mental health. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they were slowly fading. One evening, as I sat on my porch, watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and I had survived. The journey wasn't over, but I was on the right path, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. Revenge had brought me satisfaction, but it was redemption that brought me peace. And with that peace came the strength to move forward, to rebuild, and to find happiness once more. Months had passed since that fateful day in the cafe with Emily. Life had taken on a new rhythm, one defined by healing and rebuilding. I poured myself into therapy, work, and my relationships, determined to mend the fractures that betrayal had wrought. But the scars remained, a constant reminder of the pain I had endured. One day, while I was out for a run, my phone buzzed with a message from Susan. She had been a constant support, and her strength amazed me. She wanted to meet for coffee, and I agreed. We met at the same park where we had talked before, and as we sat on a bench, the afternoon sun casting long shadows, Susan began to speak. "Jake, I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Your support has meant the world to us, especially to Brian." "How's he doing?" I asked, genuinely concerned. "He's better," Susan replied, a hint of a smile on her lips. "He's been attending therapy regularly and is making progress. It's slow, but it's steady." I nodded, feeling a swell of relief. "That's good to hear. He deserves a chance to heal." Susan reached out and took my hand, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And so do you. You've been through so much. How are you holding up?" I sighed, thinking about her question. "It's been tough, Susan. Some days are better than others, but I'm getting there. I've been focusing on myself, trying to find peace." She squeezed my hand gently. "You will, Jake. You're strong, stronger than you know." As we sat in companionable silence, I realized how far we had all come. The journey was far from over, but we were moving in the right direction, and that was something. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected invitation. It was from Emily. She wanted to meet again, this time at our old favorite restaurant. I hesitated, but ultimately decided to go. It was time to confront the past once more, to see if we could find any semblance of closure. When I arrived, Emily was already there, looking nervous. She greeted me with a tentative smile, and we sat down. The familiar surroundings brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad. "Thank you for coming," Emily began, her voice wavering. "I know it's a lot to ask." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "What did you want to talk about?" Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I've been working on myself, going to therapy, trying to understand why I did what I did. I know I hurt you deeply, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry." I listened, feeling a mix of emotions. "Emily, I appreciate that you're trying to make things right, but the pain you caused, it's something I'll carry with me forever." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know, Jake, and I'm so sorry. I'm trying to change, to be a better person, for myself and for those I hurt." We talked for a long time, delving into the past, the mistakes, and the path forward. It was a difficult conversation, but it was necessary. By the end of it, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. We might never fully heal from the wounds, but at least we were trying. As I left the restaurant, I felt a strange sense of closure. Emily and I might never be friends again, but we could find a way to coexist, to move on from the pain. It was a step towards healing, and that was enough for now. Meanwhile, my relationship with Tom was also evolving. We spent more time together, talking about our past and our hopes for the future. He was genuinely remorseful, and I could see the effort he was putting into rebuilding our friendship. One evening, as we sat on his porch, sipping beers, Tom turned to me. "Jake, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I know I can't change the past, but I want to be a better friend, a better father. I want to make things right." I looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "We can't undo what's been done, Tom, but we can learn from it. We can try to be better." He nodded, a determined look on his face. I'm committed to that. Jake. For Brian, for Susan, and for you. Our friendship was still fragile, but it was mending. With time and effort, we could rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It wouldn't be easy, but it was worth fighting for. As for Brian, he continued his journey of recovery. He enrolled in college courses, trying to find a new direction in life. I supported him as much as I could, offering guidance and encouragement. He was like a younger brother to me, and I wanted to see him succeed. One afternoon, Brian and I went for a hike, a tradition we had started during his recovery. As we reached the summit, we sat down, looking out at the breathtaking view. Jake, Brian said, breaking the silence. I know I messed up. I've made so many mistakes, but I'm grateful for your support. I don't deserve it, but I'm thankful. I smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. We all make mistakes, Brian. What matters is that you're trying to make things right. I'm proud of you for that. He looked at me, a mix of relief and gratitude in his eyes. Thanks, Jake. That means a lot. As we sat there, I realized how far we had all come. The path to healing was long and difficult, but we were on it together. The betrayals and the pain were part of our past, but they didn't have to define our future. In the months that followed, I continued to focus on my own growth and happiness. I pursued hobbies I had neglected, traveled to places I had always wanted to see, and deepened my connections with family and friends. Life was slowly taking on a new meaning, one defined by resilience and hope. One day, as I was sitting on my porch, watching the sunset, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered, curious. Hello? Jake, it's Linda, your aunt. I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. I've been following everything, and I see the strength and grace you've shown. You've come a long way. Her words touched me deeply. Thank you, Aunt Linda. That means a lot. As we talked, I felt a sense of connection and support that I hadn't felt in a long time. My family had been through a lot, but we were finding our way back to each other. The journey of healing was far from over, but I was no longer walking it alone. With each step, I grew stronger, more resilient. The betrayals of the past were painful reminders, but they were also lessons. They taught me about strength, forgiveness, and the importance of moving forward. As I looked out at the setting sun, I felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was ready to face it. With my family and friends by my side, I knew I could overcome anything. Revenge had brought me closure, but it was redemption that brought me peace. And in that peace, I found the strength to rebuild, to heal, and to embrace the future with hope and courage. As the months passed, I felt a sense of renewal. The dark days of betrayal and revenge were behind me, and I was focused on the future. I had found a new rhythm, one that was centered around healing and growth. My relationships with my family and friends had strengthened, and I was rediscovering who I was outside of the pain that had once consumed me. One sunny Saturday morning, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. It was something I hadn't done in a while, and it felt good to be out in the fresh air, taking in the sights and sounds of everyday life. As I strolled past the park, I noticed a new community center had opened. Curious, I decided to check it out. Inside, I was greeted by a friendly woman named Laura, who gave me a tour of the facilities. There were classes for everything, from yoga to cooking, and I found myself intrigued. I had always loved cooking, but had never taken the time to really learn. On a whim, I signed up for a cooking class that was starting the following week. The first class was a revelation. Our instructor, a vibrant woman named Marie, was passionate about food and had a way of making even the most complex recipes seem approachable. As I chopped vegetables and stirred sauces, I felt a sense of joy and accomplishment that I hadn't felt in a long time. Cooking became a new outlet for me, a way to express myself and find peace. In the class, I met a diverse group of people, all of whom had their own stories and reasons for being there. There was Karen, a retired teacher looking to try something new, Mark, a young father wanting to impress his kids with his culinary skills, and Sarah, a single mom finding time for herself. We quickly formed a bond, sharing our lives as we shared recipes. One evening after class, Sarah and I stayed behind to help clean up. As we worked, we talked about our lives. She told me about her daughter, Lily, and how she was balancing work and parenting. I shared a bit about my journey, careful not to delve too deeply into the painful parts. You know, Sarah said, as we put away the last of the dishes, it's rare to find someone who's genuinely kind and willing to help others. I can see that in you. I smiled, touched by her words. Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot. I'm just trying to find my way like everyone else. As we left the community center, Sarah asked if I wanted to grab a coffee. We walked to a nearby cafe and spent the next few hours talking about everything and nothing. It was easy, comfortable, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something more. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I continued to see each other. We cooked together, went for walks, and talked late into the night. She was a breath of fresh air, and being with her made me realize how much I had been missing. Slowly, I allowed myself to open up about my past, about Emily and the betrayal, and she listened without judgment. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Sarah turned to me. Jake, I want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. Her words touched me deeply. Thank you, Sarah. I feel the same way about you. We grew closer, and it wasn't long before we started dating. It was a new beginning, and while it was sometimes scary to open myself up to the possibility of being hurt again, I knew that I couldn't let the past dictate my future. Sarah and Lily became a bright spot in my life, and I cherished every moment we spent together. Meanwhile, my relationship with Tom continued to improve. He was making amends, both with me and with his family. Brian was attending therapy regularly and had even started volunteering at a local youth center, finding purpose in helping others. Our friendships were healing, slowly but surely. One afternoon, Tom and I went for a hike, something we hadn't done in years. As we reached the summit, we sat down, taking in the breathtaking view. Jake, Tom began, breaking the silence. I want to thank you for giving me a second chance, for helping Brian, for being there for Susan. You didn't have to, but you did. I looked at him, feeling a sense of closure. We all make mistakes, Tom. What matters is that we learn from them and try to be better, and you're doing that. We all are. He nodded, a look of determination on his face. I won't let you down again. I promise. As we sat there, I realized how far we had all come. The betrayals and the pain were still part of our story, but they didn't define us. We were stronger, more resilient, and more connected because of what we had been through. Life was starting to take on new meaning. I was finding joy in the little things, in cooking, in spending time with Sarah and Lily, in rebuilding my relationships. The road to healing was long, but I was no longer walking it alone. One evening, as I was cooking dinner for Sarah and Lily, my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. She had been keeping her distance, respecting my need for space, but she wanted to meet one last time to finalize our divorce and talk about the future. I agreed to meet her, feeling a mix of emotions. When we sat down at the cafe, she looked nervous but resolute. Jake, she began, her voice steady, I wanted to thank you for meeting me. I know this hasn't been easy, and I'm sorry for everything I put you through. I nodded, feeling a sense of closure. It's in the past. Emily, we've both moved on, and that's what matters. She smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. I'm glad you've found happiness. You deserve it. We talked for a while, finalizing the details of our divorce and reflecting on our journey. By the end of the conversation, I felt a sense of peace. Emily and I were both starting new chapters in our lives, and I wished her well. As I left the cafe, I felt lighter, more free. The past was finally behind me, and the future was bright. I returned home to Sarah and Lily, feeling a sense of gratitude and hope. Life was unpredictable, full of twists and turns, but I was ready to embrace it. With Sarah by my side, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, and that was enough. The betrayals of the past had shaped me, but they didn't define me. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient, and I was ready for whatever the future held. The sense of peace and happiness that had settled into my life was something I cherished deeply. Sarah, Lily, and I had formed a beautiful bond, and my relationships with Tom, Brian, and the rest of my family were on the mend. I finally felt like I was in control of my life again. But as life often does, it threw an unexpected twist my way. One evening, as Sarah and I were preparing dinner, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, and the voice on the other end sent chills down my spine. Jake, it's Emily. I need to talk to you. It's urgent. My heart sank. Emily and I had settled everything, and I didn't want any more drama. What's going on? There's something I need to tell you. Can we meet? Please, it's important. I hesitated, glancing at Sarah. She gave me a supportive nod, sensing the tension in my voice. Okay. Emily, where do you want to meet? We agreed on a quiet cafe downtown. When I arrived, Emily was already there, looking anxious and frazzled. I sat down, bracing myself for whatever she had to say. Jake, I'm so sorry to drag you into this, but I didn't know who else to turn to, she began, her voice trembling. It's about Richard. Richard, the wealthy businessman who had been one of Emily's lovers, and the man whose secrets I had exposed to help bring down Tom. What about him? He's been threatening me, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. He found out that I was the one who leaked the information about his shady deals. He's demanding money and threatening to ruin my life if I don't comply. I felt a mix of anger and pity. Emily, why didn't you go to the police? I did, but he's covered his tracks so well. They don't have enough evidence to do anything. I'm scared. Jake, he's powerful and vindictive. I don't know what to do. I took a deep breath, trying to process the information. Richard was a dangerous man, and Emily was clearly in over her head. Despite everything that had happened between us, I couldn't just turn my back on her. Okay, Emily, we'll figure this out, but you need to stay safe and lay low for now. I'll see what I can do. Emily looked relieved, her shoulders sagging. Thank you, Jake. I don't deserve your help, but I'm grateful. As I left the cafe, my mind was racing. Richard was a problem I hadn't anticipated, and I needed to deal with him quickly. I called Tom, explaining the situation. Jake, this is serious, Tom said, his voice filled with concern. Richard is dangerous. We need to be careful. I know, Tom, but we can't let him get away with this. We need to find a way to expose him and protect Emily. Tom agreed to help, and we began digging into Richard's past, looking for any weaknesses we could exploit. It wasn't long before we uncovered a web of deceit and corruption. Richard had been involved in illegal activities for years, using his wealth and influence to cover his tracks. Armed with this new information, I contacted a journalist I knew, someone who had a reputation for exposing corruption. I provided her with all the evidence we had gathered, hoping she could bring Richard down. A few days later, the story broke. Richard's empire was exposed, and the authorities launched a full-scale investigation. He was arrested on multiple charges, and his grip on Emily loosened. She was safe, at least for now. Throughout this ordeal, Sarah stood by my side, offering unwavering support. I was grateful for her presence, and it only strengthened our bond. We were building a life together, and nothing was going to tear us apart. But just as things seemed to be settling down, another twist emerged. One evening, as Sarah and I were relaxing at home, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find a man I didn't recognize. Jake? He asked, his expression serious. Yes, that's me. Can I help you? He handed me a folder. You need to see this. It's about Brian. Confused, I took the folder and opened it. Inside were documents detailing a hidden side of Brian's life, one that none of us had known about. He had been involved in some dangerous activities, and his past was catching up with him. I felt a knot in my stomach as I read through the documents. Brian had been struggling more than we realized, and now he was in serious trouble. I needed to confront him and find out the truth. The next day, I met Brian at a secluded spot in the park. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around. Brian, what's going on? I demanded, holding up the folder. What is all this? He sighed, his shoulders slumping. Jake, I didn't want you to find out like this. I got involved with some bad people a few years ago. They promised easy money, and I was desperate. I thought I could handle it, but it spiraled out of control. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, feeling a mix of anger and concern. I was ashamed, Brian admitted, and after everything that happened, I didn't want to burden you with my problems. But now they're coming after me, and I don't know what to do. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. We'll figure this out, Brian, but you need to be honest with me. No more secrets. He nodded, looking relieved. I'm sorry, Jake. I'll tell you everything. As Brian opened up about his past, I realized how much pain he had been hiding. He was scared and vulnerable, and I knew I had to help him. Together, we would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I contacted the authorities, provided them with the information Brian had shared, and worked tirelessly to ensure his safety. It was a difficult and dangerous process, but we were determined to protect him. Through it all, Sarah was my rock. She offered support and encouragement, helping me navigate the complex and often treacherous path we were on. Our relationship grew stronger, and I knew that with her by my side, we could overcome anything. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace. The road had been long and filled with unexpected twists, but we had faced them together. Brian was safe, Emily was out of danger, and Richard was facing justice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah took my hand. "Jake, you've been through so much, but you've come out stronger. I'm proud of you." I smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude and love. "I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah. You've been my anchor through all of this." We sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the moment. The future was still uncertain, but I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Life had a way of throwing unexpected twists our way, but we had proven that we could handle anything. With Sarah, Lily, and my family by my side, I was ready for whatever the future held. The past was behind me, and I was embracing new beginnings with hope and courage. As I looked out at the stars, I felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led me to a place of strength and resilience. And for that, I was grateful.